Hi everyone, welcome to the 12th and final week of Music for Mindfulness with the Orchestra and Arts for Health Milton Keynes. My name is Anna and I'd like to thank you for joining us today and thank you for taking part in this journey of Music for Mindfulness with us. I hope it's introduced you to some new music that you love and perhaps some mindfulness tools that you'll find helpful. Do remember, if you've missed any of our videos, you can find them all on the Arts for Health Milton Keynes website or by searching the word music, the number 4 and the word mindfulness in YouTube. I recommend whenever watching our videos having a journal or a notebook beside you. It'll just be a place to note down anything that you found interesting or useful. And you might continue to use this in the future beyond our program to make a little note of music you enjoy or wellness tips that you'd like to keep hold of. So for our last mindfulness session, I'd like to introduce you to the man who introduced me to mindfulness. His name is Jon Kabat-Zinn. And if you found this theme of mindfulness useful or interesting, I really recommend looking him up. He has an extraordinary way of encouraging us to meet each and every moment of life in the fullest possible way, with acceptance and with understanding. We are human, so it's natural that our minds will wander from time to time. It's just how we're made. But if we can accept that and embrace that and just do our best to keep bringing our minds back to the present, there is a real wealth of life to discover. The most memorable Jon Kabat-Zinn meditation for me is the one that uses just a single raisin. And I really recommend after this video, if you have an opportunity, find a raisin or a little piece of dried fruit and try this out for yourself. So what you do is you take the raisin and you place it in your palm. You don't eat it right away. You just take a moment to look at it, to notice what this raisin looks like, to observe it. You might notice its overall shape, its form. Turn it over to have a look from another angle. Notice the nooks and the crannies of the skin, the kind of oscillating shape that the skin can make. You might notice the texture of this raisin sitting in your palm. How heavy or probably light does it feel? Give yourself the chance to notice as much as you can. Now, once you've had a really good look, why not see if this raisin has any scent? Bring it up to your nose and see what you can smell. Maybe there's no scent at all. Maybe it's a scent that surprises you. Just notice whatever's there. Finally, pop the raisin into your mouth, but don't swallow it down right away. Again, be mindful about the experience of biting into it for the first time. Does it feel a bit sticky in between your teeth, maybe? What's the flavor of the skin? And then what's the flavor of the flesh or the texture of the flesh in your mouth? Are these things different? How does it feel to chew this raisin, to feel it becoming smaller and smaller in your mouth? And then finally, what does it feel like to swallow it down? I think the reason that I so appreciated this meditation was that I couldn't count the number of times in life that I'd mindlessly eaten a raisin. I'd sort of assumed that I knew what that experience was. I knew what that tasted like. I knew what it felt like. It wasn't something that I was particularly interested in noticing. And what I discovered was that I had no idea at all of what that experience was. And I think that's a fantastic metaphor for life. I think if we can take the time to notice, to meet each moment in the present as it comes, then life has an incredible richness that we could be lucky enough to discover. I want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you for taking this journey with us, with Alina Orchestra and with Arts for Health Milton Keynes. I hope you'll join us again for events in the future. Do feel free to follow us on social media. And in the meantime, stay present, stay well, stay curious, and take good care of yourselves.
Hello again. I'm Hilary, and this is our final segment of the Music for Mindfulness series, which is a sad moment at one level, but I hope you find it's an interesting series, and I hope you're able to listen to the first 11, which are still available, so if you've missed anything, it's always there for you. For our final programme, we're going to look at the greatest musical invention, perhaps, of the Western world, the symphony orchestra. Now, the symphony orchestra is an extraordinary gathering, really, because it involves a large number of musicians playing together. And in the case of the normal orchestra, you have 3 sections: the strings, the woodwinds, and the brass. And then a 4th section, the percussion, which in earlier orchestral music tends to be just a single player playing kettle drums or timpani, which are these drums that used to be mounted either side of a horse, so you can hit them with 2 hands, left and right. The number of timpani got greater as the orchestra got bigger, and then you added other instruments, side drums, cymbals, and so forth. But today I'm going to look at 2 of the rather smaller scale pieces of music, which I think rather beautifully use the orchestra. We'll have some of the larger scale and indeed louder pieces, which you may want to listen to, having listened to these first 2. Now, the symphony orchestra, by definition, was available to play symphonies, itself a form which was only invented in the 18th century. And in the course of that century, the composers Mozart and Haydn, 2 of the greatest composers of the classical period, added to their symphonies, which were normally 3 movements in the early stages of the symphony orchestra: fast, slow, fast, and you can see the sense of that. They added a 4th movement, which was a dance, a courtly dance called a minuet. That courtly dance turned into something rather different in the 19th century. It tended to be more driven, often called a scherzo because it was a kind of musical joke, but it's always in triple time, either really measured 1, 2, 3, or if it's a scherzo, quicker 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but still basically with a triple formation. And the one I'm going to introduce you to now is Mozart's last symphony, the Jupiter, number 41, perhaps the greatest symphony up to that point. It's an extraordinary work in a whole range of ways. But the minuet is a very beautiful, simple little tune, but like so much of Mozart, tinged with darkness. The first tune goes like this. So a simple tune, and yet with this semitone moving downwards. It's not all that cheerful, is it? Very interesting that it could be so much more cheerful. But no. Then repeated a step higher. It's called a sequence, very good way of composing 8 bars for only 4 bars invention. And then loud, the same sort of tune. And that's how it goes on. So this very short little fragment, repeated a step higher, and then with a sort of slightly triumphalist bit at the end. But all the time, these little semitones which Mozart put into the music cast a tiny shadow over the sound. Now, minuets are helpful to the audience because each section is repeated. So if you miss something the first time, you get it the second. Let's call the first section A. So you have AA, then you have the second section BB. That's all part of the minuet. You have a different kind of dance in the middle. I'll come back to that in a moment. It's called the trio, But that is, as it were, C, C, D, D. And then you go back to the beginning and you have A, A, and B, B again. Or sometimes you do without the repeat when you go back. So it's a sort of 3 pieces, each half of each piece repeated. So you get quite a lot of repetition. That does mean you get to hear it a lot, and that's quite helpful. So I've given you the tune at the opening of the A. Now we come to this little trio, and the trio is traditionally more relaxed than the minuet and very, very gentle. And this one is very sweet, actually. It's a very sweet thing. It starts with a little chord for the woodwinds and horns. And the violins play. And even here there's a semitone. Not, but, which is just again a tiny bit of darkness. The D, the second half of the trio, gets suddenly much more intense. And those 4 notes, which just seem to be 4 bars, actually become very important, because in the last movement, that tune is very closely related to the opening sound of the 4th final movement, which turns out to be an enormously important tune. And this is one of the very first times in music that there's a melodic link between one movement and another. In the 19th century, the Romantic period, that becomes quite a feature. But this was Mozart being peculiarly inventive in linking the thought together there. So here we have it, a absolutely standard orchestra for Mozart's time, woodwinds, some brass and timpani, together with a string section, playing what's fundamentally a dance, or rather 2 dances, the minuet either side of the trio, and the trio starting very gently and suddenly going to this enormous explosion of tension and angst in the middle, and in doing so, playing the tune which is going to come back in the next movement, the final movement of the piece. I hope you enjoy it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that rather extraordinary example of Mozart's great art. He wrote that symphony, and indeed two others, the 39th and the 40th, also immensely great pieces, in the year 1788, and he wrote them knowing that he had no opportunity for them to be performed, which is an extraordinary step, because by and large in the 18th century, composers only wrote music when they were paid to do so. They had a commission from someone to write the stuff. So what made Mozart decide to write these three great symphonies without any possibility that they were going to be played, we simply do not know. But I think it's a big statement about the fact that he knew he had something very important to say before he died, and he wanted to say it then and at that time, even though it might not be heard for generations afterwards. It's a rather wonderful thought that it is now heard a great deal. Now, our next piece is slightly different, though it connects nicely to Mozart. This is by the composer Felix Mendelssohn, a much sunnier figure than Mozart, but like Mozart, a composer who developed very early and wrote some enormously fine pieces, actually not quite as early as Mozart, but in his teens he wrote some fantastic music. So that obviously is something they have in common. Mendelssohn wrote among the early pieces, and I think it was 17, an overture to Shakespeare's play A Midsummer Night's Dream. And many years later, the King of Prussia, King Frederick, asked him to write some more sort of theatrical pieces to go with a staged performance of Shakespeare's play. And in that set of pieces, where he extraordinarily recaptured the sort of sounds of the music he'd written when he was 17, when he was now writing in his late 30s, he wrote a scherzo, so you understand, not altogether dissimilar from a Mozart minuet, only quicker, the scherzo, which represents Puck, the rather malicious and ill-tempered fairy. And this is fairy music. Now, as I said to you earlier, this is in triple time because it is a scherzo, it's an accelerated minuet, though the tempo is so quick that you may not even feel it in triple time. It's going yak taka taka tik tok tok 1 2 3 1 2 3, but it still is that triple time. And this opening tune, played by the flutes, who have a very significant role as fairy music providers, is this. Quite a simple little tune, chattering. You can almost imagine the beating of wings. And the whole piece really comes from that pattern. There is a tune which comes a little later in the strings, which is perhaps very slightly different. A collection of chattering semiquavers, ticka 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 ticka, not the da taka taka we had before. Those are the only two real tunes in this movement. But as a sort of picture, almost a cinema film of fairy music, it's hard to imagine it being any better. Most of it's quiet. It is using the full orchestra, full woodwind section, full brass section and timpani, as well as the strings. But it's very light and very airy and astonishingly clever. I hope you enjoy this. Just imagine the fairies in a Shakespeare play moving around, looking a bit unsettled and looking also slightly malicious, because that's what Shakespeare's fairies were. And ask yourself the question, could you do this with a single instrument? I believe the answer is no. I think it's this unique sound of the symphony orchestra with so many different families of players contributing to the colours you can deploy that makes the orchestra such a remarkable thing. And I hope you will follow up my additional listening when I will give you another opportunity to hear different sorts of orchestral music which show you the extraordinary range and quality of a large group of players playing simultaneously together. They have to listen very hard to each other. It's an extraordinary concept of all these great artists pooling their resources to become a single group, which is actually one voice speaking together with many people making the sound. Enjoy, and I hope we shall see you again soon. Please come to a live concert if you're able to. The only thing better than listening to orchestral music on a screen is listening to it in the flesh, And if an orchestra comes to play somewhere near you, I urge you to go and listen to it, because I think you will find it extraordinarily satisfying experience. Thank you for listening, and I wish you well.